trans women are free. We would like to begin by recognizing that the land on which we are standing belongs to the Tongva people, the indigenous people, what we now call the Los Angeles Basin. If you have never heard of the Tongva people, we highly encourage you to look up their people's rich history and continued fight to gain federal recognition. We come together tonight to engage with 4 Black, trans, and gender nonconforming femme people to discuss what it means to resist against racism, sexism, homophobia and transphobia, xenophobia, ableism, and class divides. We ask that you each become attentive listeners and to reflect on the ways you can center Black, trans, and femme folks in your work and in showing up for justice. In a country in which many of us are disproportionately affected by oppressive mechanisms since 1492, we want to elevate the importance of solidarity and coalitional efforts towards decolonization. This program aims to raise awareness and provide space for discourse, dialogue, and solidarity work. We want to emphasize that racism, misogyny, homophobia and transphobia, xenophobia, and class divides have been critical issues throughout the history of the United States. Through this event, we hope to highlight the necessity and ability for all of us to show up for social, political, and economic justice.
This program has 3 parts: an opening performance, a 45-minute panel discussion with a Q&A, and a closing performance. The purpose of this event is to engage in critical discussions about the intersections between theory and activism. As of mid-October 2018, 22 homicides of trans people, mostly trans women of color, have been reported. One of the main objectives of tonight's event is to highlight the agency we have to end violence against Black, trans, and femme peoples. We want to provide the space to elevate the ability of all people to work towards social justice through an exploration of various modes of resistance, using the body, building on academic discourses in conjunction with ongoing activism in different communities, creating autonomous spaces, and challenging ourselves and each other about implicit and explicit forms of racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, ableism, and class divides. With this knowledge comes responsibility and more so, accountability. We hope that each of you will join us in putting more of what we say in solidarity into actions of unity.
Before we begin tonight's program, we would like to take a moment to acknowledge the hard work and efforts put in by Professor Amy Tahani Fidmeshki. And students both in Professor Tahani's course who helped develop the panel questions and those on the steering committee. We would also like to thank all of you for showing up for tonight's event. Without your continued support, spaces such as these would not exist. The theme for tonight is a riff off of the Combahee River Collective's A Black Feminist Statement, and the declaration that until Black women are free, none of us are free. The collective writes, if Black women were free, it would mean that everyone else would have to be free, since our freedom would necessitate the destruction of all the systems of oppression. We agree with the statement, but expand the analysis to say that Black, trans, and femme peoples must be centered in the struggle for liberation because of continuous exclusionary practices and mechanisms in our society as well as within our social movements. As students who are devoted to learning about what more we can do to be true advocates for those who are silenced within our communities and are continuously collaborating with each other to make our proposed social changes a reality, this is our call to action to all of you. Please continue to build upon tonight's conversation and think about how you can more effectively center Black, trans, and gender nonconforming femme folks in your own lives. We are grateful that many folks stepped up to allow us to honor the work of our panelists. We especially thank the Geology Department, the first STEM department to help fund this event. Again, thank you to our panelists, sponsors, students, audience members, faculty, and staff for help making tonight happen.
Hello. I'm Etsy, and I've been doing this performance piece for a few years now, since 2014. The story is, I wrote this piece while I was incarcerated at the LA County Men's Facility. I was luckily in solitary confinement. The reason I was incarcerated was because I had chosen to actually liberate some medicine for my own needs. I was homeless at the time, and I had like $10 to my name, and it was an interesting time. It was like when the Beyonce album came out, and like everybody had Beyonce on the brain. So me and some comrades were actually interviewed for the LA Weekly, kind of lightly criticizing one of Beyonce's Superpower music videos. It was a music video about Superpower, and we were just kind of lightly criticizing how like celebrity culture and celebrities, they might often like appropriate resistance culture when they're not actually in the streets and doing the same kind of work that we're being killed and brutalized for. So we were just kind of giving a critique on that. We were just like, we love Beyonce as an artist, but like we want to see something a little bit more real than this fantasy Superpower thing. So when that came out, the article had just come out, and I got arrested for liberating some medicine because I was like, I would rather just attempt to like liberate medicine because I don't want to pay for it, you know. This piece is actually called Poverty Hurts. Poverty hurts. They shine the light on whatever's worse. Incarceration is a disease of a nation. Poverty hurts. They shine the light on whatever's worse. Trying to fix something that they can't fix, but it ain't me. It's this complex prison industry. Imperialismo. In machismo. Daddy said that you're not a girl. Work hard like a him. That's all that matters. Black, brown, and yellow, red. It's not our system. We can do better. You're just another slave. Labor the pain away. This time I'm gonna take them down, 'cause they're criminalizing black, trans, and brown. Poverty hurts. They shine the light on whatever's worth. Incarceration is a disease of a nation. Poverty hurts. They shine the light on whatever's worth. Trying to fix something that they can't fix, but it ain't me. It's this damn new form of slavery. Capitalismo. You stay distracted and spend your wage. TV says, be good consumers, but don't steal and don't run away. 'Cause cops will say, shoulda shot them sooner. You're just another slave, waging the pain away. This time we're gonna take them down, 'cause they're criminalizing us out of town. Poverty hurts. They shine the light on whatever's worth. Gentrification is a disease of a nation. Poverty hurts. Poverty hurts. words, they shine a light on my every words, assimilating into what we can't reach, cause it ain't we. Let's abolish prison industry por anarquismo. Thank you.
Hi everyone. How's everyone doing? You're good? Okay. I'm gonna sing a song for you. Yeah, I'm just gonna sing it. I'm not gonna give it an intro. Hello, 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 hello. Hello, 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 hello. Hello, 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 hello. Thank you. You're good. Yeah, so I wrote that song. That song is about how, yes, Black trans women and Black trans people and trans people of color are being murdered, but we're also have astounding rates of suicide attempts. So it's something like 40% of trans adults have attempted suicide. And so society is actually creating an environment where not only are y'all, cis people, not all of you, but cis people at large are killing us, but also making us want to kill ourselves. So it's another form of murder that we don't actually talk about, and I wanted to talk about it. So, yeah.
Can y'all hear me? Yeah, I can hear me in the back too. Like up there. Okay, Joe. So in interest of time, we want to ask everyone to read about our esteemed panelists on the programs that were handed out. If you didn't get one, ask a friend, find us later. We also want to bring attention to our speakers' pronouns that are listed on their placards. Please be mindful of this, it's like really important.
Can y'all hear me? Okay. So as moderators, Kayla and I have certain privileges and abilities that have granted us this ability to be moderators that we want to acknowledge.
Yeah, I think like I can start. So like I'm a hetero, cisgendered, like Christian woman, and I think it's also important to mention like the safety that I have, like saying these identities, right, as like a form of privilege.
Yeah, and for instance, I'm a cisgender, thin woman, and like many of you, we're college students in a private institution that's also allowing us a privilege. So considering all of these things, we want to continue this ever-present and always necessary conversation about what a decolonized, liberated world would look like and what the best ways to get there. So we're gonna move into questions now. So for the panelists, keeping in mind like your own personal definitions about freedom, liberation, what a decolonized world looks like, what does that decolonized or liberated world look like, and why do we need to center Black, trans, and gender nonconforming people in that effort to get there? And we'd like to start with Ed Z.
That was a lot of a question. Yeah, I just think that freedom or liberation, I feel like freedom is very much a kind of the language. It's been co-opted by like the West. I feel like the West viewpoint of freedom depends on like the psychic well-being of like white Western Eurocentrism and civility as it is. So like what would freedom look like in a definition that hasn't been so muddled by those intentions? I personally think that when it comes to centering the narratives of people that experience some of the most harsh aspects of violence, what I'm seeing is not really like it's like the reason why trans people are killed is often because of the insecurities of cis hetero men. And yeah, like Davia was saying earlier, like an entire society that deems us unworthy or demonizes us. And yeah, I think it's really important to question where that comes from, whether it's like, whether it's built into our institutions or into our family circles. I think that freedom for me is not having a particular nation state to facilitate our everyday lives, because the nation state, the thing that upholds anti-Blackness, the thing that upholds anti-indigeneity and transmisogyny historically. I don't know how we can reform something that it goes that deep and goes that far back. So, yeah, how do we mitigate that? How do we talk about creating more laws? Like what do laws mean? Like, what does it mean for like to ask for the government for like these concessions when the government itself is inherently white supremacist, capitalist, ableist, it's normative, and heteropatriarchal. So, yeah.
Yeah, we definitely want to open it up to everyone on the panel. We're like really, really interested to see like what that looks like.
Yeah, I agree with what Edzi said, and I think that that's something to aspire to, but on a day-to-day basis, what does that look like for us, like in this room right now? I think when someone, if you have a privilege, that means that whatever you have a privilege about, someone else that's being taken away from someone else. So if you have a privilege about something, then someone is oppressed on that same front. So let's say you're a white person who has a trust fund. What are you going to do with that trust fund? Are you going to hoard the money? Because a lot of the power structures are about maintaining order and hoarding money, privilege, connections, all these things. So like one example would be for if you are a white person in America and you have family money, that probably is connected to the slave trade. And that's how recent the American history is. So what are you doing with your money? Are you emptying out your trust fund to give it to someone else who doesn't have that money? No, you're probably not. You're probably protecting it through the state, right? So thinking about real ways, that like tangible ways, because I'm sure many of you here have trust funds, right? So if you're thinking about yourself, what is it that you yourself as a person, as an autonomous person, what are you doing? And what are you not doing?
Building off of that and on a personal and present level, I think as a gender nonconforming person in this panel, trans women, that means not talking for folks. It means not taking up too much space here. It means diverting whatever resources I gain from this to the hands of other Black trans women. At the very least, I think there's a lot more that could happen. But I also am like very critical of the word centering and like how it's used. I think the center is something that's built and propped up by white supremacy. It's a platform that's been created. And so there's a lot of violence that you have to do to get there, and there's a lot of violence that happens to folks when they are there. And even just like in the way that like we hear about trans stories in the media, it's always this very, not always, but it's often this very flattened, re-traumatizing, this many trans women have died, blah, blah, blah. And I think that that is a feature of the center. I was on a panel recently with another Black queer person, Surae Michelle, and she said something like, there's so much powerful work happening in the margins. And I think a free world is what happens when you destroy the center and you start focusing on diverting resources, like you were saying, back to the margins. Because again, the center is a dangerous place for folks. I think we don't realize that a lot, especially when we talk about representation and putting people on screen. What happens once that person is there? What are they subject to? What do they lose to be there? And so I'm more interested in how I can reinforce the margins than center voices in a world where centering is inherently violent.
I'm not an academic in any way, so I'm just gonna preface that right off the bat. Actually, like, thank you all for being here, but I quite hate academia and on a level. So, like, but then it also speaks to a specific thing, like the cognitive dissonance that exists of, dang, this academia shit, but also I gotta eat. So like, how do you hold those all the time? That's one. Two, the other thing is I want to speak from a gaze that I have. I've been in the music industry for a long time. And one of the things that I have definitely discovered, the difference between being an artist now and having been a music producer for so long, is I was very like sheltered from the shit that an artist experiences. So like, for example, recently, gosh, let's say, the last 2 weeks on my Instagram, I've literally been called a racist by like 5 white boy beat makers. Like literally, like big homie beat makers that everybody's like, oh, yo, they're so dope. And I'll just be like, nah, you're all right. And then they'll be like, what? F you, you're a racist. I'm like, how am I a racist? Because I don't like your shit. Like, I don't understand. And it like kind of blows my mind because we got into a conversation about culture vulturism, right? And I said to the dude, I was just like, yo, I mean, yeah, you make the same trap beats that like 90 other beat makers make on Instagram. That's really dope. Like, I'm not saying that you shouldn't do that, but like, don't sit here and come at me like, white boy, like, you know hip hop, like hip upside down, left and right. Like, I'm just not here for it. And it just kind of makes me go back to this like thing that you just said, like that really sparks a lot for me is though, the center when you're out there, and now as an artist versus having been in the background as a music producer, the thing that always seems to happen now is like, everybody who shouldn't have something to say has something to say. And I'm just like, damn, my boys, like, you know you didn't make this, right? Like, that little beat you made, that's dope, but let me tell you what the origins of that are. They are black. They are black. They are black. Hip-hop is black. That's like our story. That's our region. I remember when I heard Post Malone say that bull, I was just like, yo, you make money off of culture vulturism at the same time while saying that the music that I do every day, that I put my life and soul and effort into, is not real music. You can't learn anything from it. It doesn't feel like anything. There's no soul to it. But you make money off of it. I don't know. It just feels like the center, I really want to piggyback off that. The center is a bad place. Because the center has shown me like, I just want to get my craft and my art out there. I just want people to understand the message that from the gaze of a black trans woman, what it's like for me and my specific story. I can't speak for anybody else. And I'm watching me trying to speak about these things through my music, and like I'll get big people who hit me up in the DMs but won't like my posts or actively interact with me publicly on Instagram, but will hit me up in the DMs like, yo, your shit is dope. I'm like, yeah, but I'm a black, like I use this word for me. I'm a black tranny, and you're like mad, so you like don't want to be connected to that, like to the world. So you just hit me up in my post and like, hey, that's dope, but you won't say it on the actual feed. And like that, to me, like that's the problem with the center. The center says, I'm so worried about fitting into what the status quo is, that even when something is dope and I like a thing, I can't say that out loud because I'm worried about what the rest of y'all are gonna do. And I don't know, like, it just, I can't, like, I don't know. It bothers me. There's some like fundamental changes that need to happen. The last thing I'll say to this is that I'm not really, I've been voted for, what, 10 some years now, and I can't say I've seen anything that I've ever voted for in front of my face help me do a thing. Like, I'm just like, yo, what, all these things that I've been doing, because you keep telling me I'm supposed to do that, and I think sometimes it's kind of pervasive to keep coming up to people of color and be like, vote, vote, vote. Bitch, back off. Like, why are you mad? Like, I'm just trying to live. Like, I'm trying to eat. Like, you know, like, okay, let me vote for another white dude? Like, it's like, which white dude is better? That's literally what it's been for the 10 years I've been voting. Which white dude is better? That's literally it. So, anyway, there you go.
Okay, wait, before I respond to that, for the people that are kind of like back there, if y'all want to like try your best to wrap around, or like if you're walking this way, just there's a camera, so like we don't want y'all to stand in the margins, so definitely like come into the space. Wow, there was a lot, I think, in what everyone was saying. In particular, this idea of like centering, which like, I don't know, that's like a theme a lot, is like, all right, how can we put people on a platform? How can we, you know, and I think something that we're like very curious about and would like love to hear everyone's answer in like a little flashback. We had Margot come talk to us, and she did like this, like the freshman seminar talk, but she was a part of like the Combined River Collective, and Before the talk, she had dinner, and it was like a bunch of like really dope ass people, just kind of like eating and kicking it. And we had this conversation about before we can like get to liberation or like even thinking about a liberated world, we need to like decolonize our hearts. And I think like us having that instinct of like let's center somebody is like a sign that we're not really decolonizing our hearts. And so I'm like curious what that means to y'all. You know what I mean? Like what does it look like? I really like this idea like a daily versus like in general. And can we maybe start with Hari and then spread it out on
him? I don't know. I think I don't really have an answer, and I think that anyone who does have an answer is probably lying. I can't speak for everybody, but I've wanted to have an answer for a long time, and I think that I made a lot of mistakes in doing that. But back to your point about like what daily practice is, and seeing how that was failing, one of the things I always come back to is how do I show care for Black folks more today than I did yesterday? And so in everything that I do, in every critique that I write, and every anything that I put out there, if it's not building on something, if I'm not getting to a deeper level of care, then it's not working towards that level. And that can look like so many different things. Most recently, it's been my relationship with my parents. And we have a very interesting relationship because mostly due to my queerness. But I've come to like a different type of engaging with them. A lot of that is because they don't have so much power over me anymore. So I know that this isn't something that everyone can do, but I can hold their mistakes and their failures in a different and I think more caring place now than I could before. And it's hard. It's a lot of going to therapy and like a lot of like making sure I'm not invalidating the harm that they've done to me, while also trying to make space for them to be better people. And so that's like one tangible way that has shown up for me. But in everything, I try to show more care for Black folks than I did the day before.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, sorry, I was like, let me tell a story. Basically, it's just like thinking about what a decolonized like heart, like for us as individuals, what that looks like broadly, but then I think like, what do you do to like get there? Does that make more sense?
Yeah. I guess I'll start with like what I do to like try and stop myself from internalizing how the colonized world sees me. So a large part of my like personal spiritual practice has been about thinking about how my ancestors would have seen me, and like imagining like what if this whole country wasn't a thing, and like what if like it was different, like what if it was different, and then like trying to build my own view of myself based off of that. So I guess like my active like decolonizing my heart is just like changing the way that I see myself even, and trying not to let like the prison system, the court system, and even other people in my community, right? Even people around me, like how, because we project it back onto other people, right? And so it's more just about like that personal intimate moment with myself and like trying to connect to something outside of my own experience.
Decolonization decolonizing my heart for me is not a metaphor. A lot of I just feel like decolonization is like it's now like a class you can take, you know, at like the Y, and then decolonize your hair, your bra, decolonize specific things when we're not actually like talking about like what is, we're not talking about power. I think some of the things that are missed when discussing decolonization is addressing like power, institutional power, the history of that, where that comes from, how it's facilitated and propagated. So yeah, I feel like in some of my like daily practices have been like, yeah, definitely thinking about ancestors a lot. Thinking about ancestors consistently, thinking about like this, you know, like life as like a Black and a trans and like feminine person is really hard, but then thinking about you know, what my ancestors who were enslaved, like what their lives were like, and that really, yeah, that it's upsetting, you know, going to that place, but I think it's necessary to acknowledge that and that's even hard. Like when I think about decolonization, I feel like so many indigenous cultures globally have a different kind of way that they relate to the land, and I want to get back to developing a relationship, a real relationship with the land that isn't so commodifying, owning, you know, just like using it as like a resource for my own gain instead of like acknowledging it as something that is more than me. And I feel like when it comes to the troubling thing that I run into is like, you know, well, yeah, as like indigenous people throughout the globe, often are acknowledged. Well, a lot of indigenous people and practices have been like dispossessed of their land, and so that dispossesses them of their identity. And then like, but what does that mean for like enslaved Africans who have been dispossessed of not only their land and that identity, but their like being itself? You know, what does it mean to be like commodified in such a way? Like, how do you restore that semblance of self? And like, is that always going to be like hip hop? Is that always going to be jazz? Is that always going to be pretty much every single thing that is relevant and is like, you know, culture forming, and that is like what, like is that us, and like what does it mean to like for that always to be in opposition with like what the rest of the world is utilizing to exist in terms of like psychic well-being and all that. But yeah, I think it's like, I think just from my personal practice, it's definitely, yeah, decentering specific currencies that I've seen facilitate the well-being of the world. Like masculinity is glorified in this world, so is whiteness, so is normativity, so is like men, so are men, you know, so I'm like, what, like I almost have to be completely backwards in order to like gain my own sense of self and gain some sort of semblance of like, of decolonizing, but like not in a way that's like just for me, but in a way that can be like restorative, in a way that's like not just metaphorical. It's like I want us to do all the things that we can do to make the nation state irrelevant, or like the civil world irrelevant, and that's really scary for the people that rely on it. But for the people that are being killed by it, it's not. It's freedom. That's, you know, liberation and freedom. So.
Okay, so for me, daily practices, decolonization of the heart. Low-key, I kind of hate these terms. I just want to say that right off the bat. Like, that word, I feel like colonization, decolonization, it just gets thrown, all this stuff gets thrown around so much. Example, a friend texted me the other day and was like, hey, let's hang out. Cool, but when we want to hang out, well, I just want to make sure my needs get met. What? But that's not the first time that's happened. Like, you know that. You know I'm not wrong. Like, one of y'all in here has gotten that message before of like, and it's just all these like buzzwordy things, and I'm just like, yo, can we just talk to each other? Like, how do we do that? And then specifically for me, like, I guess, so when I'm privileged by the universe and the goddesses above to have an ability to express through my music and via my art, and I'm so thankful for it, because a thing that I've been saying to myself a lot recently is I'm realizing, this is gonna be hard to hear, I just wanna say that right now, this is gonna be hard to hear. In our bubble, we talk about healing and restorative justice and all these things all the time, right? And it's very good that there are so many of our voices being heard, but a thing that I'm noticing is it feels like we just kind of echo each other on into more trauma and more pain. And so what I've been asking myself in a radical way, and I feel like this is a radical way to do that, is how am I giving myself space to do that and then moving forward? Like, move through that shit. That's valid. All your pain is so valid. All my pain is so valid. I had two parents. Like, I had a father die in prison like a month ago, like after almost finishing like a 20-year stint, and then died of a brain aneurysm. That shit is hard, right? But also, I'm an entrepreneur. I sat down for a month and didn't do anything, and a lot of shit fell down. And it was like, yo, you gotta stand again. Like, your pain is real, but you gotta stand again. And I'm just like, damn, but self, like, this is so hard. Yes, you're right, but you gotta stand again. And I think we need to have more conversations around, okay, we all have this collective trauma. It's all so real, but what are we doing to move forward in it? And just to respect it, not gaslight yourself, know that it is valid, but then move forward through it. A thing I do now with my work is I feel like I have this song that I'm doing tonight that is about the interesting, tumultuous relationship between my mother and I. That song is 3 minutes and 10 seconds long. Anytime I feel those feelings about my mother, or I see her picture, or grandmother brings her up because she's in the hospital and dying of cancer, as well as the other parent just died, it's all really heavy stuff, right? I put that song on, or I look at those lyrics and I remind myself, I put this somewhere once and it's there now. I put this somewhere once and it's there now. I don't have to hold this all the time. I don't have to have this sitting on my shoulders, sitting on my heart, sitting on my soul every moment of every day, all the time. But I'm not saying don't take a knee when it comes up. I'm saying know when you rise again. Like, when is it time to be like, okay, I took this knee, I let myself feel this, and now I gotta move, because I have goals and things I wanna do, and I wanna liberate myself and those around me. How do I do that? So I listen to that song, or I see those lyrics, and I think, okay, that is there. And I have to remind myself, I have put this somewhere. It is hard. I cry still, of course. I go through it. It's a thing. But it's so important. I think it's so important, a part of my healing at least, daily practice and decolonization of the heart, quote unquote, is not holding that trauma that she enforced on me for so long and our family. Also, that same ideal can be now taken outside of my music and outside of my personal family matters, right? And move into a world where, like so many of us have said on this panel right now, that is just not there for us in any way. So today, my partner and I, we left the lunch meeting with some awesome students here today, and I got a phone call from my insurance company about a referral. It's funny how the mental health industry is there to help you and hurt you all at once. I really think it's there to hurt you more than anything, if I'm just gonna be 100. This lady got on the phone with me, some random white lady called from an unknown number, didn't tell me who she was. I asked her twice for her information. She felt like it was wrong for me to ask probative questions about, you're calling to do a mental health assessment over the phone randomly and like 4 in the afternoon, like, hey, can you do me a favor and give me some more details? She did not like that. So she started asking me, do you want help or not? And I was like, wow. So then I'm like excited. Today was such a good day, has been a good day. It was going to be a good day. And it got in my heart. And then I remembered something that a comedian, Kamal Washington, he has this really amazing thing that he's been saying that has just been ringing through my ear. I'm not holding that shit. Matter of fact, I'm gonna toss it right back at you. It took a little bit more effort and time out of my day than I really wanted. I kind of wanted to take a nap before this, but also I knew I needed to get this off of me. So I called and I filed a complaint. And but in that complaint, specifically, I stated, listen, I don't want anybody to lose their job. I want them to do their job better. This is what I want. I want someone to, she asked, what do you want? She wrote it down. I said, I want them to sit down, go over this call, and talk with this person about how they're harming their patients instead of helping them when they speak to them in that manner with that tone of dismissiveness and like disinterest, you know? And then I left it there. It was, now she got to hold it. Somebody's going to sit down with her and talk with her about this. And now it's not my thing to hold it anymore. Like, throw that shit back. Don't make people make you hold that stuff. Like, that's, no. Accountability is a real thing that needs to happen at all times. Make them hold it. It is not yours to hold. Like, that's it. So, yeah.
Yeah, that was definitely an important reminder that our words mean things and we have to think about what we're actually saying. So kind of along those lines, I want to go back to one of the bigger ideas we brought up right in the beginning, which was this idea of abolishing the state and the nation. And I think we're sort of in a time where a lot of people are talking about abolishing specifically like the carceral system. So having that in mind and considering this idea of in order to heal, we need to acknowledge the harms that have been done to us, but also hold space for healing. So you've been talking about how do we hold each other accountable and prevent ourselves and like repairing harm in a way that's not reliant on the carceral system and the state and, you know, health institutions that aren't actually trying to heal us.
I have no idea. Am I allowed to start there? Like, can I be like, I have no idea? Okay.
The $1 million question. How do we? How do we do that? That's a good question.
That's literally it.
I think part of that is one, just acknowledging that it's possible, because I feel like a lot of, you're right, we do talk about abolition a lot. And I think a lot of people use that without actually realizing that there have been communities without prisons and police, and there still are today. And that is actually an active movement towards that, is to believe in this possibility. But I think the next step beyond that, and something that I try to do, is to show up in those places where we say, like these state apparatuses, where we know that they are dangerous to Black folks in particular. What can you do? And so that means like actually going out and like seeing what cop watching organizations are in your neighborhood. Actually like showing up for your friends if they need you to de-escalate a mental health situation. And that's not to say that we all have to take on the role of like trained therapists or anything, but we should be acquiring those skills if we know that we're working towards a world where that's possible. So I try to always show up. If there's something happening even like down the street, to be there if there are cops around, to make sure I'm documenting, and that can only go so far, and that's not like the end of that. But I think that it's definitely a start that not a lot of folks are doing, not enough folks are doing. And the more people that are doing it, the more possible it is to actually convince other people that it's possible, because they can actually live in this space where you don't rely on the police and on the state for these resources.
I think I agree with all of that. I also believe that the reason why some people might be reluctant to form their kind of communal spaces to rectify issues is, the daily grind. We've all been so socialized by this kind of rugged individualism that only that only centers the self, and it doesn't really like acknowledge like our actual interdependence, lived interdependence that is needed for us to, you know, rely on one another. So, yeah, I agree that like stateless societies have and still exist, and to impose a kind of carceral system on those people is the violence. Like, that is the initial violence that has actually happened to, like, on a global scale to quite a lot of people. And it's interesting since, like, carceral solutions have kind of, like, made quite the wave in the last 30 to 40 years or so. I don't think it's really, it's like, the point is to house someone in this facility that is, you know, once they go inside of this facility, there's hyper violence that they're socialized within, and that doesn't necessarily like restore and or transform any future social relationships. How is that a solution to an issue, to an interpersonal issue, to a systemic issue? So just like, yeah, I think we should look at how it's not worked, how the carceral solutions haven't worked, and be very, very weary of, what people will call like carceral feminism, and what does it mean to like deploy more laws for people who like, one thing that people are talking about right now is like, non-binary identity is being recognized by the state. Suddenly non-binary people are going to have on their ID cards like X or something. In California, at least, that's happening within the next year. And I'm always frustrated when I hear these kinds of state-guided solutions that co-opt our identities or co-opt our bodies, really. Because the state is really the reason why any of you have any sort of prejudice against transgender people or queer people in the first place. You know, from it, like, you being socialized in all of its institutions, its media, to allowing you to be programmed into thinking that, like, we're not natural, or we're, demonizing or villainizing or literally criminalizing a lot of, like, what we're doing. So, like, the gender rebels of the past, whether it's Marsha P. Johnson or Sylvia Rivera, have, like, acknowledged that, like, this, with anti-cross-dressing laws, that has, like, crafted a kind of positionality that people hold within their minds regarding trans women or black people, really. Like, criminalization depends on your anti-blackness. The state depends on that. So I'm like, why are we allowing, like, I don't necessarily want the state to make amends by facilitating these, like, my identity on some bullshit cards or ID cards that rectify who is human, who is not, to then, like, facilitate us having to go from A to B, from nation state to nation state. No, like, can we actually talk about how that's violence? Can we actually talk about how having documents in order to move from land to land is violence? So, I guess to answer the question, I don't know if I did, which was, what was the question again? It was carceral solutions. I think that, it takes a lot to organize communities in ways that are, collectivized and not necessarily, like, I don't think it's an easy one kind of person can answer that. I think it takes, like, entire communities of people to get together and actually have real conversations that, you know, resolve these kinds of issues. But then once you create that kind of mutual aid, you facilitate those mutual aid conflict resolution models, like, what are you going to do to protect them? That's the real question.
Right.
Yeah, I feel like something that's like bringing out a lot for me is like anti-blackness and violence, and like how they're so like intertwined. But I'm also really curious, like, the state is doing this because like activist groups and like all of these like movements are really pushing, right? We're like, this is the next step, this is how we're gonna get there. I'm like curious about like, what do we do about the fact that our activist spaces are like pushing forward these things that are kind of violent and like thinking that we're not? I don't know if that makes sense. Do you know what I mean? Like we're okay. I feel like you know. Like what? How do we deal with like the violence that's coming out of the things that we're pushing in these activist spaces? Do you know what I'm saying? So like that ID, like these like centering, these efforts that we're thinking are like, this is how we're gonna do it. This is how we're gonna do it. Are like violent. And so like how do you navigate pushing forward? I guess the real question is, how do you navigate pushing forward with that potential violence, like in activist spaces and like in these conversations?
Do you mean like the violence that we that we reiterate towards each other, or do you mean the violence that we experience as a retaliation to the work that we're doing?
I think
which is
both, but
both.
particularly the violence that we're perpetuating when we're trying to like make something new.
Okay. Yeah. First, can I say something? I just want to acknowledge that the current industrial prison system was built out of the slavery system. And if you don't know that history, you need to go and look into that history, because it will inform the way that you think about calling 911, and how police were actually slave catchers first, right? So if you don't know that history, please learn that history, because it'll bring you back to speed, because actually the thing that you might think you know, you don't know. So a lot of it is actually about re-educating, and that's something that like doesn't happen all the time. So here we are. I like the question you posed about like in our own activist spaces. I personally take have taken a large step back from activist spaces, because I don't believe in the way that community is used, or the idea of community is used. I think that I believe in the ideology of community and like the potentials of community, but I myself have experienced a lot of violence within community spaces, right? I guess to answer your question, like how do I go about that? It's like, for me, it's just like picking my battles, for me personally. But again, I want to go back to what I said about like reallocating sources. It's not just about money, it's also about like, if you have a privilege where you know that you're not going to be shot by the police, how do you show up in a space? Do you protect the Black people who might be shot by police? This is a good example. So I was at a activist training camp, and we were doing a training about how to interact with the police in the event that they show up at any sort of public event, right? And so the exercise was that some people were the activists and some people were pretending to be police, and that we were seeing what would happen. And there was only a few Black people there, and there was a dark-skinned Black woman who had her child with her there, and a non-Black POC person was also participating and came up to her, and this non-Black person said to a Black person, "Can you talk to the police for me? I have a child at home and I'm scared for my child." While this dark-skinned Black woman is there like, "Excuse me, do do you understand what you just said? Where it was like a really like mind-boggling moment where it's like, oh, like this is actually where you're at. And so it actually goes back to like re-educating yourself, because we've been trained to think, oh, like something bad happened, call 911. Like how many times have we heard that? And so it's like re-educating your trained responses, because we all have trained responses when something bad happens. And oftentimes those trained responses put Black, queer, trans people in danger.
I live in the Bay Area now, and to piggyback off of what Davia just said about, like, that story rings with me specifically because after living there for almost 2 years now, the thing that I keep experiencing, it's not just white people. I'm just gonna keep it 100. Like, it's not just white people. In fact, there are people in this room with faces like the people that constantly hurt me on a regular basis in, like, say, San Francisco. Example, there's a banh mi shop that I used to go to a lot, and my partner and I would go to a lot. My partner is white, so she goes in a lot of times. I'll sit in the car because parking is horrible, right? And every time she's gone in, she gets the food, we come back, we eat it, it's great, go to the beach, it's all great. Well, one time, I was driving Lyft, this is like 6 or 7 months ago, and I walked in there because I managed to find parking to get food. There is a white person next to me, and then there's a white person, and then a group of, I want to say, Asian folks there, and they were talking to each other, and then the place is owned by some Asian folks, and they were talking to them, and I stood in line and just stood there, and stood there, and stood there. And then finally, I had to be like, hey, I exist, could I maybe order some food? And when I ordered my food, there were no words said to me. It was nod, and then I got the food that I wanted. Then they continued to laugh and talk and chill and shoot it up with the people in the spot that weren't Black, right? Then another Black man walks in who, he looks like he might be like doing pretty well in life, and I looked at him and he looked at me and he was like, do you need help? And I was like, yeah, because they're like not trying to serve me. And it was blowing my mind because I had given these people so much money. Because like they're like the cheapest sandwich in the city that actually is like good food, and it's like not this big for $12, but it's like $7. It was great. Sorry, so as I thought, right? And I'm just sitting there and I'm just thinking about this, and I'm just like, man, this time when that happened was like not the first instance of that. I was in a parking lot like 2 weeks later in San Francisco, and this lady who happened to be Asian was walking in the parking lot with me. It's nighttime, and I'm walking behind her because our cars are in the same direction. In fact, I'm pretty sure I saw her pull in and park pretty much 3 cars down from me, right after me. I'm walking, I'm on my phone, and I didn't notice it right away, but she just kept walking faster and like doing this thing. And I was just like, wait, are you doing what I think you're doing right now? So, not gonna lie, I kind of fucked with her a little bit. So I walked a little bit faster to just like test that theory out. And I was like, oh, you are. And then I walked really quickly to my car. I hit the thing, like the button to make the lights go off. You know, the lights come on, the doors are locked. I get in the car, and she just kept walking. But I knew that I was pretty sure that car 3 down from me is your car. And when I pulled out and started to drive, she came back down the stairs and went to that car. Like, what else am I supposed to gather from that? From those situations? Like, how do we do that? How do we hold that it's not just white people? Like, and I want to say also that it's trippy because those same people go through so much too, but then you flip back and you go, well, how do I hold? You experience racism and you experience horrible idealisms of white supremacy, saying things like model minority and shit like that. But at the same time, your ideal to assimilate so hard is constantly harming me. I'm a Black person and you're constantly harming me. Like, why do you, like, shouldn't we, like, be fighting against this system together? Like, I thought that was the idea. Like, we clearly don't fit in. You'll never fit their norm. We'll never fit their norm. At the end of the day, I can't change my skin. I can't change my face. I can't change the features. You can't change your features. Like, we are never going to be them. So then the question then becomes for me is like, well, why are you trying so hard to, like, fit their narrative? Like, why, to the point that you would do harm to other people who experience similar intersecting experiences as you do, as far as racism, as far as, like, stereotypes, as far as fetishisms, right? Like, how do you hold that? Like, and I'm just watching this and like living in the Bay Area, that's been the thing. The theme for the last 2 years is like a constant reminder of, damn, it's not just white people. But then I also know that white supremacy is what informs this thing where it's like, hey, let me just pit y'all against each other in the center so we could just keep, so you're now like, while we do some shit over here, right? Like, and then the next thing you know, oh no, we have some law that's passed and we were busy like fighting, and it's like, so like that's a thing, and it's like, how do I hold both of those things? How do I feel comfortable in my own skin? Like, I work hard every day, like I hustle so hard, my partner and I be hustling, and like I just want to get my black joy on, you know? And I'm just watching so many people from so many angles trying to take that black joy from me, and I don't understand it. Or they take my black joy until they think I'm assimilating like they are, because they'll be like, oh, you drive this car. Oh, you're like me. Nah, B, like, it's really not like that. We didn't get this shit the same way. Like, my hustle is not your hustle. Like, you need to know that. But how do I hold those people in my heart, but then also have to be afraid of them too?
I just want to say really quickly, building off of your point, Nadia, that there is a difference between privilege, which is a word that I hate, and power, and a difference between using your privilege and divesting from power. And I hate the way that we use the term using privilege, and not you. I think that you gave a really great example of divesting power and like taking from trust funds. But I think that that's a very different way that when a lot of people who have quote-unquote privileges use that. Because when you're using your privilege, you wake up the next day and you still have that privilege. But when you divest from power, hopefully you're getting closer to not having it. And that's dangerous. And so I get really annoyed, especially when white folks are like, I'm using my privilege X, Y, Z. I want to hear how you're divesting from power. What danger are you putting yourself in? Because it's going to be dangerous, or at least scary for you if you've lived in this society that's always coddled and protected you, to lose that. And then going back to, I think another part of your question was, in these activist spaces, we so often push forward solutions that involve the state. And I think that just goes back to Etsy's point, which is that there has to be, all of our points, which is that there has to be an education of what's possible. There has to be an education around how the state is always violent and how that violence morphs and evolves into different things, how it goes from slavery to Jim Crow to the prison industrial complex. That's the same routes that eventually get a non-binary designation on your car. And that there are other possibilities outside of the state, because I think that most of us in activist spaces are frustrated with the state. But when I actually argue with folks, as someone who doesn't vote and is like completely divested from the electoral, and we can argue about that later. But what we always get down to is that they don't think that there's other solutions. And I'm like, bro, I'm out here organizing with folks on the street. I'm out here getting money into like homeless people's hands, and I'm doing this every day, not just one day every 4 years in an election. And those things are possible, and guess how much more is possible when we all divest from this and put that energy into that together. And so that's the work that I try to do.
Awesome. So yeah, there's definitely this realization that even in the spaces where we're trying to move forward, we encounter or reproduce anti-Blackness. So along this line of thinking about possibility, I wonder, what are we missing in terms of how we define and understand what is anti-Black, and then like going from that, how do we imagine and create spaces that are pro-Black or Black positive, yeah, in the work that we do.
So I think it's really hard to build solidarity and coalition with folks who we're not on the same page of like what's actually physically, spiritually, mentally like destroying us, destroying our bodies. So I don't think, I definitely don't think that we're all on. It's very much a social war at this point. It's like it's not just a war for like resources. It's a war of ideas and positionality and logics. Like me, for example, I'm not using the same logics that people are using in their everyday life. The majority, probably, of people are using in their everyday lives, whether it be liberalism or conservatism. The particular political philosophy that I'm using hasn't ever been acknowledged by any single institution that stands today. So by that, my very way of thinking is marginalized. So yeah, when I think about, as much as I want to talk about, pro-Blackness, or like maybe, decentering whiteness, what have you, I'm for it, but I need other Black folks to understand that, yes, the social construct of race is built on the bodies of of Black people suffering, Black people being on the bottom, always. However, within these racialized constructs, there's also other positionalities that exist within gender that certain people have over other folks like the trans women and visibly gender non-conforming people that are everywhere. So I wish I could go door to door and be like, I'm pro-Black. But the fourth door I'm gonna hit, I'm gonna get either made fun of, I'm gonna be hit on, or they might be like, oh, wait, like, what are you? Like, I'm going to experience a different kind of violence, and I need other folks to actually acknowledge that kind of violence. Until that happens, I don't really see a point in like building. Like I've really, really tried building with like a lot of different people for them to recognize that there's different kinds of violences that I experience, not just as a Black person, but also as a as a trans feminine person, or as a person with mental health disabilities. There's so many different intersecting like violences that people go through that it's really hard to acknowledge just the one. And then also, it's like, what does it mean for like what Leah's expressing is like that sentiment, that global that anti-Blackness is global. Like this issue is global. If she goes to Puerto Rico, if she goes to Japan, she goes anywhere in the world, that's global. That's a global phenomenon. So what does it mean for our entire civilization to rely upon that? And I'm often like, yes, reparations are really great. We want reparations, but like for actual reparations to be gained within the context of the Americas would no longer be. America would be ended. And then in the context of the global civilization would end should there actually be like a material reparations, for the ancestors and current issue of anti-Blackness. So I don't know how to rectify that with the non-Black people that psychic well-being and livelihoods are dependent upon that kind of like system or collective unconsciousness. I don't know how to rectify that. Other than, I'm not gonna vote. That's for damn sure, because I'm like, here are the things that I'm trying to delegitimize, right? I'm trying to delegitimize the state. And then here are the things that other people are like, well, you need to. You actually are consenting to all the harm that happens to you should you not vote. And I'm like, no, that's actually not how consent works. I didn't consent to the state to begin with. I just got here. Someone consented a long time ago, maybe, but actually, maybe that's true for whites, but it's not even currently true. Like, you did not consent to having so much, police having so much authority over your body. You didn't. It's implicit consent, and that's not actual consent. So, yeah, to answer your question, I don't know how to rectify the issue of, like, pro-Black spaces or decentering whiteness or decentering, I guess, anti-Blackness. I don't know how to rectify it.
You moving on?
No, please.
Just really quickly, I think that I keep bringing back possibility, and I think a big part of that is offering new possibilities to folks. But the other side of that is like pointing out what's impossible too. And I think a lot of the work that I try to do is equally about showing how the gender constructs especially, but all constructs, were never meant for Black folks. And this is why even cis women are masculinized, and Serena Williams is attacked for looking at men, and how Black cis men are always feeling this lack for not being in the home, and it's beaten over and over them all the time. But I think that's because commodities, which is what we were brought here as, we're not supposed to be gendered like white folks were. And I think when you go throughout history, you can point out multiple examples of this, and it makes sense, but we still live under this reality, and we're trying to, like Leah said, we're trying to fit ourselves into narratives that never were supposed to work for us. And I think that that's like my only engagement that I can have with cishet people is on that level. That this isn't all that's you've convinced yourself that something's impossible. That's impossible for you is the only thing that's possible. You're running around in circles, and it's detrimental to all of us. And so that's my response to that.
Yeah, okay. Wow. Sorry, I was like, that's like, you're right. I've been thinking about the same thing for like 19 years, thinking like I'm moving, but I'm not. I feel like, so this is like our final question, and I really kind of selfishly like kind of want to pull on that idea of like possibilities. And in particular, like how you all have been able to like imagine these new possibilities, and like how you've been able to like keep the strength, I think, to keep imagining these new possibilities.
This is the one about hope, like maintaining hope? Okay. Okay. I just want to say that for me, I think that it's okay to lose hope. I think that a lot of transformation for me came from losing hope. Because then I changed where I was putting my energy and like what I was putting my energy into. I think that it's more for me about being able to see myself reflected than anything, and keeping the people who do reflect that to me, the good things that I want to see, like keeping those people close to me, and letting that be a guiding force for a lot of like how I envision or like what I envision. But I just want to say that it's valid to lose hope, and I think that we like put hope and like positivity and like, oh, but it's gonna happen, like all these things, we put that like on a hierarchical level, instead of just being like, no, actually right now I feel hopeless, and like being able to sit with that. Because I think by creating a conversation that essentializes hope, we're ostracizing people who don't have hope, and making it so that people who don't have hope, like if you want to talk about the fact that you don't have hope, it's better to be able to talk about it than to feel like I can't, like I don't want to like bring someone else down. But it's not completely valid to not have hope. I think that's my answer.
I completely agree. I don't have much faith at all that we're going to get through this in my lifetime. But at the same time, embracing that has given me a different kind of hope. Like, I think there's a difference between like what the world calls hope and optimism, and like what's possible for us as Black folks. Like, I don't need that. Now that I've like embraced that, I also don't need that. And so I have hope in things that happen outside of my lifetime. Like, now I can find faith in like what's gonna happen to like my great-great-grandkids, or like what happened with my ancestors, or like, and I can find so much possibility and like kind of like a spirituality in that, without having to like be rooted in what this world offers at all. And I think that that's like the end result of everything that I was trying to say earlier, is like none of this shit's gonna work for us. That includes the way that we put an emphasis on hope, and that includes the ways that we think about time and like what's possible in our lifetime. And I want to think about all of that shit completely differently, and that's like a new possibility.
Yeah, I think I want to say something, because you said how we think about time. And I think the thing with hope is that it places like what's happening on a linear time basis, which is inherently white. And actually a lot of cultures think about time as circular. So in circular time theory, the past, the present, and the future are happening all concurrently. So they're all happening at the same time, right? And so it goes into like ontology of hope, like what does that mean? When like you could also maybe sense that what you want to see is actually already happening, right? And that's what I meant when I say like, when I see reflections of it, because it's already happening. It already happened. It's happening right now. It's going to keep happening. It's just in the particular manifestation that we see now is what we're able to like understand.
There's a question about hope. I'm gonna gather that. It's funny because I don't know if the people that we were at lunch with today, do you remember I said I'm careful with that word? And like, I was literally like, I don't know about that hope word. Like, that word is a word that I've not always, I think I've actively removed that from my vocabulary. It's not a thing that I say very often. Because I think about things like this. Does anybody here know what Black Wall Street was? Black Wall Street is just a sad, horrible story of Black people were literally becoming wealthy and creating their own wealth and equity in our country. And this is like before things like redlining and before the carceral state that we see now with policing, right? which, by the way, you should know that police and redlining, one is a factor of the other. Like, it was like, hey, these black folks are getting money. You're not supposed to get money. We need to make sure we draw some lines on where you can go. So then when we put you there, right, you're gonna be, I got a good job. I got my degree, did my thing. Let me go to the bank and get a loan for a home. No, you live in the red line zone. And then you fast forward to, like, gosh, I have mixed feelings about this guy, but he made a really great statement in this one song that always sticks with me. No, that's not gonna happen today. But it's Jay-Z. That's what I'm gonna say. And we all have feelings. I feel it. But this black man has been around for a minute. And he said something that kind of stuck with me. He was like, "Please don't die for that hood your mama renting. Please don't die for that hood your mama rents in." Well, the thing is, though, the reason your mama rents there is because 9 times out of 10, redlining began and did a thing where it said, okay, over time, I'm just gonna keep removing the possibility of you gaining equity and wealth. Now, what we hear wealth and we think dollars, right? Nah. Remember, land in capitalism is true wealth. Like, when you listen to people say, oh, we didn't really have much growing up, blah, 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 and then I ask them about their life, and it's a white person, by the way. And they're like, I literally have a friend that we just went through this with, and my partner knows exactly what I'm talking about, and she started talking about how her dad got a master's, and then I was like, okay, yeah, master's, that's cool. Interesting. And then she's like, we were just chilling in the room at the house smoking, and she just started revealing shit, right? And she said, my dad built the house we grew up in, and we went on some vacations, but not really many. I was like, boo, you won't poor. Like, that, you got equity, you got wealth. Like, you don't see that? Like, how don't you see that? Like my grandmother's the only person in our family until very recently who has ever owned land or multiple properties at any given time. And so when I look at hope, like, I don't really see a place for it. Like, I feel like hope sometimes to me is used as a tool to not do shit. That's the thing I've noticed a lot. People like to say hope and play lip service to it. And then we look around and West Oakland is on 18th Street, it's the hood. On 20th Street, it looks like a mixture of Manhattan brownstones and like San Francisco brownstones. And you're just like, and there's $700,000 for like a 2-bedroom thing. While on the other side, literally a block over, you see people on the street still slinging. You see like other sex workers out there still working because they can't get nothing. And I'm just like, yo, so hope, right? What did it do? Well, my grandmother, who's 65 years old, no, grandma's like 70 now, damn. She just had a birthday. I'm bad at math. Anyway, when I look at her and I say, Grandma, I never want to take away from what you and your friends went through, because she had a friend who literally was sprayed by those hoses when they integrated the schools in upstate New York. Yeah, that's the other thing too. Like, we always talk about the South, right? But like, she grew up in upstate New York and was like, yo, this shit was going on up there. It was just louder down there. And they did a better way of like putting on a smile and doing have you ever seen the pyramid that shows all the overt racism at the top, but the rest of it is like, well, I don't know if that's racism, right? like that whole vibe, like that's what she went through. And I was like, Grandma, I don't want to take that away, right? You know what I'm talking about, right? Okay. I was like, Grandma, I don't want to take away from what you went through and what your people went through and the hoses. She was like, oh no, the shit y'all going through is worse. I was like, what? G-Bot? How you figure? She was like, cause think about it. She said, I'm watching y'all go through all this shit that we said we had hope to change, and we marched in streets, and we sat at counters and did all these things, and we like fought and literally were trying to liberate. If you ever talk to an older black person about what they think about Martin Luther King, you might get some very interesting things you didn't expect to hear, by the way. You should do that one time. And she was just like, nah, like we fought for this already, and you're going backwards. Like, this scares me. I don't understand this. Like, she's like, I'm like so old now, like, and I don't understand why this is still happening. And we had hope, and she was the one who got that from. She was like, what has that done? What has hope done? What has it done? She's been voting for what, 40-something years? She was a teacher for 43 years. She's just like, she left teaching because she was just like, I just don't know that there's anything else I can do at this point. What has hope done? I don't know.
That's a good. segue, or like that's a good relation to make is like hope is voting. Hope is voting. It's like, you know, there's a good majority of people who can't, like actually can't. Either they're neurodivergent or they're incarcerated. There's literally millions of people that are incarcerated, or they're undocumented, and then just can't. And then like all the people who can are supposed to decide for the, and like those people who can't are supposed to like hope that they'll create policies with those people in mind who are incarcerated who can. So I think voting is probably one of the most unethical things that I've witnessed. I think it's another system of domination. Ranting about voting because it's a lot. It's like a lot to see that this is just, we're just bombarded by these ideas of like, oh, you know, reaffirm the nation state and colonization, like use the logics of like those that oppressed you for hundreds of years. And it's like, can we do something else? Can we do something better that isn't us consistently like expanding and like reifying and reaffirming this kind of like great mass that has been literally killing us. So when I think about the possibilities of like it is very time oriented in a way where like time isn't perceived as like the future or the past. Like I have a lot of I get a lot from my ancestors on like knowing that my ancestors used to hold people like us as sacred. I get a lot from that. I get a lot from the fact that in almost every single culture that hasn't been colonized or pre-colonization, that there was an actual place for us, like we had a real place. And it's like, what does it mean to go back to that, to rethink and reimagine the ways in which we're going to free ourselves? Like what, whose imagination are we applying when we're trying to get free? So I don't have like hope in that sense, but I do think about possibilities. And some of my possibilities that I think of are really, they're not for everyone, obviously. Like I'm like, you know, I don't want there to be death, obviously, but there already is death. You know, people are really, really scared of the word like revolution, because they're like, people are gonna die, and kids will die, and women and children will die, and I'm like, that's already happening, that's been happening, but like, you're so comfortable, but that you're literally not seeing it. It's actually probably so pervasive that for some reason, it's been normalized to you. I think for me, like, it is really important to consider the past and the future all at the same time. And I would hope that like maybe we can when I think about like today I saw an article that was like, we're kind of fucked. The planet is fucked because industrial civilization has like plundered and blundered our resources, so we're kind of really fucked in the future when it comes to that. But then all it did was center money, and I was like, what's the point of talking about money or capital in a future where you run out of water? Like, I would hope that people's like organizing capacity thinks beyond the usage of like these like silly like slave owners on pieces of cloth to exchange and ritualizing whiteness. That's gonna be something that like is going to exist in a future without water. I would really hope. So like, it's like I'm almost to a point where I'm like, the people who are fighting for global autonomy are almost on the I'm like, we need to start being that disaster to the nation state, because whenever disasters happen, it seems like people will deploy mutual aid, they'll think outside the state, they'll think beyond it, and they'll be like, actually, like, let's get to our baser, you know, instincts of like helping each other regardless of it really benefiting, you know, me, or like I know it's benefiting all of us together, so like why aren't we facilitating our organizing and capacity and resources in a way that's like unreliant upon like this other outside force that has been historically violent and racist and transphobic and all of these things. Yeah, so I think possibility is, for me, I think it's, yeah, it isn't like it doesn't have to deal with like hope so much as like, yeah, us just getting back to our baser kind of instincts of like, you know, relying on one another again instead of something else. So that's where I see possibilities happening.
I want to just like point out something that you said just now that's like really amazing to me, because you said two things. You said it's like we've become desensitized to like all of it, right? And then you said we literally spend money every day with slave owners on it. We literally spend money every day with slave owners on it. We literally spend money every day with slave owners on it. Like literally.
But Harriet Tubman is now on the $20 bill, and that's supposed to be a win to Black people.
It's like who you good, right?
Like, if that doesn't define Blackness as a commodity, I don't know what does.
So that was the last question. We want to thank you all so much for being on this panel and acknowledge that you have given us so much and poured so much just by being here, especially because places like this and events like this can be sites of potential harm and potential like fetishization and just general unsafety. So we want to acknowledge that and uplift that. And we're definitely always grappling with how do we keep the most vulnerable safe while allowing for spaces of collaboration. So with that said, we want to move into Leah Ann's performance. Q&A. Yeah. We're going to move into Q&A.
Which one first?
So we're gonna do the Q&A. So Tia and Saucy are gonna have mics. Just like raise your hand. If you're on the top and y'all are trying to chat, just like shout it out if you get called out, because we're not running up there. So are there any questions?
I don't really know how to fully articulate this, but it's been something I've been thinking a lot about recently. So as a non-binary person myself, I struggle with like my social presentation and my dysphoria. I was wondering how you like take your trans experience and make it about yourself instead of what society makes it for you, if that makes any sense. I can try to clarify if it doesn't. Clarify?
Yeah, no, I understand the question. So like how do I make sure that the choices I'm making are for me and not for other people?
Yeah.
Right. I think that I was in a very similar place where that was my thought process, was like, no, I'm making this choice for myself. But I think that thought has been complicated over time for me, where I think that, because of my social conditioning, in order to feel comfortable with myself, I have to try and make other people feel comfortable because of the power structures, and not even just the power structures, just like what it means to walk down the street. Like I can't even like step outside my own house without someone looking at me different. And so the power that I found inside of that situation that you are probably going through is that at the end of the day, giving myself affirmations that no one else can fuck with, like no one else can like be inside your head with you, and so like how do you give yourself affirmations in that space, and allow yourself the room to like love yourself at each stage, because a transition, a lot of the basis of what you're saying is this idea that a transition is a beginning point and an end point rather than an entire journey. So it's like loving yourself, and for me, loving myself at every stage of my journey, even when I'm like, damn, I feel fucking dysphoric right now. But being like, you know what, no, like, fuck that still too. Like, that's also okay if you do feel that way. And like, yeah, I would say just don't get caught in the like destination, like gender as a destination instead of a journey.
I want to say that I battled with getting braids before I came here today. Because like as you can see, I have a little fro thing going on. It's actually a lot longer, but if you know anything about black hair, anyway. And I battled with that ideal because I was just like, all right, well, I want to present a certain way so I can maybe like deflect some of the bullshit that I might catch, right? Like because I'm not femme presenting enough sometimes, which I'm completely fine with. I wasn't always though. I'm gonna be honest with you about that. Especially when I lived here in LA, I was the highest femme motherfucker you could ever find. Like, I'm going to CVS, click, 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 click. Like it was my safety, right? And it's valid for that to be safety, but I think I started to like lose me in the journey of finding me. And it was like, wait, something's wrong. Like I'm supposed to be finding myself and like understanding me more. And every time I keep doing that, or I keep trying to click in with what they think I'm supposed to be, it just makes me feel more damaged, right? And like that wasn't the point of this. Like I know that there's going to be external noise and external hatred and all that, but like if I'm internalizing what their ideal of me should be, so that tension, then when I see myself in the mirror, I go, oh, okay, I look like that thing, but damn, I still don't feel whole. What's the problem? Well, the problem is you're doing this for somebody else but you. And like I started, so now, my name, right? The artist name I go by, Lam Fembear. There's a reason for that. Because I really do, like, I identify as a woman, I identify as a trans woman, but lately I've been identifying as a fembear in the sense that I'm not a small person, right? I'm like broad shoulders, I got big feet, big hands. This is kind of ridiculous. This phone is kind of too small sometimes, right? I'm known for my typos, and I just tell everybody, listen, these thumbs, they just don't do it. So they just don't work. So I'm just like, yo, I'm gonna start owning those parts of me, and I'm gonna embody this identity of fembear, because like, right, my grandmother is a cis black woman, and she has short hair like mine, even shorter in fact, and will walk out of the house. And she also doesn't have a very high voice. Let's talk about that. My grandmother literally will answer the phone sometimes and be like, good evening, how can I assist you? And you're like, Grandma, all right? Is this like the business shop? Like, what's going on? But she also likes miter cut saws. She wants to build a gazebo for her new house that she just bought, and she doesn't want diamonds, she wants a diamond cut saw. We can all pitch it. It's $700. It's from Skill. Here's the link. Let me know. Right, okay, why am I saying all of this? Because she'll walk into Home Depot, and it was the trippiest shit. They thought she was the trans person one time, and they started giving her shit because she had a hoodie on, short hair, she was tired, so her voice was scraggly and low, and she didn't wear a bra, so she's older, and she was like, look, I guess they mad my boobs sag, and that's why they thought I was a man. And like, literally, it was just like, whoa, this gender shit just turned on its head in front of me, like, at this very moment. This is like my third year of transition, right? And I was thinking, like, wow, they thought my grandmother was trans. Like, that's some shit. Like, I don't even know what to do with that. Because it speaks to a bunch of layers, but two specific ones for me. And that made me start rethinking about how I look at myself. My grandmother is a cisgender woman who's birthed children, and she's the wonderful, powerful, strong, multiple master's degrees, 2 doctorates, kind of like just amazing. That woman is like, she moved to Boyle Heights, and wanted to know more about the people that she lived with, so she got a bachelor's in Chicano studies. That's what I'm dead serious. I'm not even joking. And I was like, Grandma, you're amazing and powerful, but somehow her appearance was the only thing they saw in that moment. And they were treating me so nicely because I was so high femme presenting in this cute little dress and just to go to Home Depot, right? Because there was safety in that. And I was like, man, this doesn't feel safe though. Because it feels like if they figure out what my mask is, then they just end up tearing me down anyway. So like, I should just be me. Like, I should just go ahead and just like, do this, no makeup. I haven't had laser in a long time. Like, and I fight as a black trans woman to get hormones a lot. Like, over the last couple of years, it's been like that. Like, things are a lot better now, but like, low key, it wasn't always. It was some shit sometimes. Like, and so that's kind of fucked with the facial hair. Like, I just keeping it 100, like, with yourself. Fuck everything else. Fuck all that noise. That noise is noise. And it's gonna hurt, and it hurts still, but then I always look at me and go, you know what? I'm a powerful bitch. And I just have to keep saying that to myself. And I encourage you to keep saying to yourself, man, I have power in me. I have power in me because these people are mad that you are being yourself in there, and they are fighting to be a part of a system to look the certain part. And you're like, nah, I'm good. And they're like, how can you do that? What's wrong with you? And every time you respond that way, lets me know I'm doing the right thing. Anyway.
Just really quickly building off of that point, this might not be directly applicable to you, but I've never seen a black person do gender perfectly. From my mother, to my father, to my brothers, to my sisters, they've always been trying and failing to live up to an ideal that would never work for them. And so at one point, and I identify as non-binary too, I just realized that I didn't care about the failing, except as it had to do with my own safety, and a lot of times it does. And so it became something outside of like trying to fit an ideal, because I knew that was impossible just because of what I experienced growing up. But yeah, thank you for that too.
That's so real.
Hey, I think it was Leanne or Hari who had mentioned earlier about like, I really appreciated y'all bringing up the fact that anti-blackness and these oppressive systems work outside of the country, like on a global scale. And I think a lot of times people think of possibilities as leaving this country and then everything will be all right. And I was just wondering, what are you all's like thoughts about kind of just like creating these spaces or forcing spaces, even though like in places where like people don't want you to have space, like how do you take up space unapologetically?
I would like to say, to answer on a global level, I think that black people in America also have a certain privilege that people who are not in America don't have. That's one layer. So yes, it does have there's a particular sentiment of like taking up space unapologetically for Black Americans in America. But if you go to, say, Cuba, how it works for Black people in Cuba is very different than it'll work for us here, right? And so we have to also be cognizant of the privilege that we have if you're able to even leave the country. And like if you're able to obtain an American passport, there's privilege there. So I think that we have to be cognizant or like careful about when we say take up space, like what that means on a global level. But on another layer for trans people, we're told that we're not even supposed to step outside our door, let alone leave the country or do anything. So I think for like Black trans people, do whatever the fuck you want, like, but try and be safe and also be aware of the privileges that you do here. And I've traveled outside of the country. I've been fortunate enough to travel outside the country. And I was told by people who are not Americans, like, you're being privileged right now. You're acting just like these white people would act. Like, you're doing the same thing, and that's very real. So, yeah.
In terms of taking up space, yeah, that's hard. It is hard to do for, especially for Black trans women, because, yeah, there's like the trans tipping point happened or is happening and in the process, and like, I feel like there's a very, it's a very paradoxical kind of issue of there's visibility, but because there's so much visibility, like we're talking about centering, because there's so much visibility, that hasn't changed like the social relationship that trans people have to cisgendered people, specifically cisgendered men. It hasn't changed those kinds of opinions, or the social relationship is still the same. We're just seen more. So it's not like their sentiments are going to change. They're actually going to become more aggravated. So we're just like experiencing a lot more visibility. Often like is in conjunction with violence. So that's hard when we're talking about taking up space. And yeah, I just want to like echo other people's sentiments about like their personal experiences regarding their like, because yeah, I definitely, I feel like when I was younger, there were so many things I wanted to do that I was told I can't do, that I'm not supposed to do. And then as I got older, I was like, I want to do all these things that I was told I wasn't supposed to do because of like gender norms and like, I agree that like gender is a very racialized thing and race is a very gendered thing. You know, they kind of like complement each other in these really violent ways. So yeah, I feel like today I'll definitely femme up my look for the sake of like safety, honestly. You know, it's like being more, I'm understanding that being more femme presenting and looking more feminine, like moving through the world as a woman is really difficult. There's a lot of violence that men bestow on women. And then the other terrifying thing specifically for trans women or trans femmes is once they clock your T, or once the men, cisgendered men usually is the issue, they realize that you're trans, there's like a visceral like, oh, what does this mean? You know, like like I don't know where I am I want to kill this person now. Like it's like it goes from zero to cray really fast. And like that's what we're kind of like seeing. And that isn't to say that like those are the only instances where trans women experience violence or are killed. It's like, it's also very like much in the domestic sphere of like, well, yeah, there's like relationships that formulate, and then for whatever reason, because of the internalizations that I was talking about earlier about like anti-cross-dressing laws and like, oh, the church and the state are combined, and like because, you know, you've inherited the qualities and the values of the church, it also then makes you feel a kind of way about seeing trans people in public. That's also, you know, something that's literally killing us. So, yeah, I just feel like visibility, like other amazing scholars and activists and trans women have said, is very much, can be a trap. And we can take up space unapologetically, but like, I think it's very paradoxical. It's like, you know, it's not good or bad for us. It's just kind of like, we're here. We've been here. We all, you know, it's funny because like gender nonconformity actually came before these designated two categories of like man and woman, like, so deal.
That's That's so real. Oh my gosh. Wow. Taking up space. Right. So, okay, I'm gonna come from gaze of my mental health, right? So, something, I talk about it in my songs. I talk about it in everything. I say it often. I am a diagnosed paranoid schizophrenic, and there's a lot of stigmatizations, right, about what that means. And then for anybody, and then add the layer of I'm a black paranoid schizophrenic, and then add the layer of I'm a black trans woman paranoid schizophrenic, and it just, like the things that run through my head as far as taking up space and like what's happening in my head right now. There's probably like 7 different conversations happening right now about all the things that are coming out right now and the things we're talking about and like holding all those pieces and trying to like, okay, do I take up space here? Oh, let me make sure somebody else gets a chance to talk, blah, blah, blah. All these things, right? Like all these things that are like bred into me to be like, be quiet and don't speak. And growing up, I had this interesting experience growing up, and I'm curious, honestly, to know if anybody on this panel can like resonate with this. I transitioned at like 26, I think it was, something like that. And I'm 31 now. And I remember when I was, whether it was right before transition or whether I was 10, 11, 12, 5, 15, didn't matter. Something about me always enticed men. Like, I don't know what it was, and men, everybody, like on all age levels. Like, I remember being in a camp, trigger warning, like sexual assault stuff. I remember being in a camp one time. My mom worked for Old Dominion University of Virginia. We used to go to the summer camp every year. And one year, I was like, this is like that year where everybody's, puberty and you're 11, 12, and a lot of shit happened inside you. You can't figure out what you're thinking and feeling. I was so gay though. But anyway, and I always knew that gay didn't always mean because they designated me boy at birth that I liked boys. Because it was like I liked boys, but then it was like this ideal of I also kind of liked girls, but that confused me. But it didn't feel like I liked girls like boys liked girls. It's tricky, right? But I remember the way that people used to look at my body, because like I always had a booty. It was ridiculous. I hated it. I was annoyed because I didn't hate it, but everybody around me and my family hated it for me because it was like, you're too femme, or we'd go buy jeans, right? And my grandmother would be like, you can't wear those because that makes you look too, don't do that. Don't do that. And I wouldn't, one time I didn't listen, so I went to the camp, had these hidden jeans in my like thing, and I kind of like how they hug my curves and all this kind of stuff. Went to the locker room because we were gonna go swimming, and these boys, as I walked by, they said some shit that I never heard before. I was like, wait, what? I don't even know what that means. I'm not gonna repeat it. And I was just like, I don't know how to hold that. And then I was so scared because it was just like, they would follow me around knowing that they had said this to me, and I would tell a teacher or a person, counselor, or a person like that, and they would say, no, that doesn't happen to boys. So like, you need to calm down. Like, don't say that again. Because it was so uncomfortable for them to even think that these group, like so many of the boys in that camp with us that were there every day were saying these types of things to me. And of course they denied it, right? Like, and so it just made me think about like, as an adult, like moving forward, like how do I take up space safely? Because all I did was put on some jeans. That's it. I just put on some damn jeans. Or sometimes I would have shorts on. I was 10 years old and I'm outside and my mom's boyfriend is like, ooh, those shorts are kind of short. But he didn't say it in a bad way. It was a weird way. I was like, ooh, and I started noticing it. I got good at noticing it because it happened so often, right? Like there were so many men around me going, hey, what about that? And I'm like, no, what do you mean? I don't understand. And so it just made me not ever know how to figure out how to exist safely but being myself and like take up space. And like lately now what I'm doing is just, I don't know, I've learned this, we get complimented. I know this happens to like anybody in this room that's of any marginalization. You get, specifically black people, you get complimented on your resilience, right? You get complimented on how strong you are, how powerful you are. It's amazing that with everything you go through, you still blah, 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 expletive, blah, 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 right? But the thing that I don't like about that really just, it like makes like honestly want to punch a wall. It's like, yo, these are necessities. I've learned this from necessity. I've learned this because of these stories I'm telling you. I've learned this because it's what I have to do. I'm loud. Everybody knows I'm loud. I'm loud, and I have no problem speaking my mind. I was not always that way. I had to learn that shit because it was like, yo, people are just gonna keep touching your body in ways you don't want to touch them. Men will touch you in ways they don't want to touch you. People will touch my body in ways I don't want to touch them. I've been at performances and like other femme folks will come up to me after the performance because they're so moved and then just start groping my body. I'm like, I don't know you. Like, literally, like, please don't come up in between my thighs and just hold your hands on my thighs. Like, I'm just here trying to be myself and like share my story with you. Why does that mean that you now get access to my body? Like, I don't know. So like, I don't know. I'm trying. I just think that fear is a thing that I exist with, and I try not to let it lead my path. I just know it's there and something that informs my decisions. But I'm still gonna keep trying to be me, and just as unapologetically quotes things as possible. Yeah. Thank you for your question.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Still works. Thank you. Can we just give them a round of applause? I don't know. Again, reiterating like the amount of labor that it's taken for y'all to be on the panel and to be like having everyone watching you consistently is a lot. So we're gonna do two things.
Are you done? No, okay.
We're gonna do two things. So first, we're gonna have a performance, which I am so psyched for. But also, like, you'll notice that there's a lot of merch being sold. Cash, Venmo, right? Cash App. Listen, y'all want to support and show up. Like, come on, y'all know money. Buy a little something. Like, please, we're gonna have this like selling after this. But definitely pay attention because we're gonna have a super dope performance.
Okay. All right. I guess this is that thing now. I don't even know where I can stand.
Do you want us to? We can move the whole table.
Nah, don't do all that shit. You're good. I'm probably just gonna walk around. Oh yeah, I don't know. You can stare at my back. I'm really sorry. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Just do Vapors Papers. It's you'll see what it says. Yeah, that's the one that. Yeah, I'm not gonna do Shut Up. That's just not my vibe right now. I'm gonna do there's one called Vapors Papers. That's like This is a song about my family. This is a song about your pain. This is a song about my pain. Oh no, keep it up. Turn. I will after. Yeah, it's no doubt. It's no doubt. It's no doubt. And for my mama, it's been 16 years on this cancer shit, crying, fussing, yelling, falling to tears. It's like gone. You ever watch the loved one fall on their knees from the pain and on knees in the night as she screams? That shit trippy. But it's tricky, you see. She was a mean motherfucker, make me scream, motherfucker, throwing dishes. It's lit, got some shit. Loses sleep functions, her words happy like fuck it. I had to watch my sister with her heart cutting. Love us, what? No mama. Soon as real, she had this brain that we slip, make a trip, say some foul shit out of mouth real quick. No mama. Is that love? I don't know. Is that love? I don't know. But I've been slow, yeah. I see it right. I should switch. I should try to go somewhere. I've been spending papers. Said I'm out of time. I should check my statement. Oh, it's been a while, yeah. It's from the heart, yeah. It's from the heart, yeah. It's no doubt. Too much at stake, too much to break. It kills me just to see your heart holding this weight. I would take it if I could, just shake it on a stall, I might split, but I'm stronger, so I'ma make it. I keep going to the stars, simply because I are. From you I go far until everybody applaud. To the make of this star, but some treat do sting, right? Like what's the meaning of it? Can we be right? Why you take so long to accept a bitch? I'm fucking amazing, I'm from you, can't you see this shit? You made me break and then you stand up and just plead the fifth. I'm hurt but you leaving, what's the meaning of it? Woo! Couldn't be greatest in the world together. Mama and me, my sister, yeah, we forever. What? But since your time is almost up, I will lay your ass no matter what. I'm a little trying to have some time. I should switch the papers. I should be on time. Spending so much money trying to make my head right. Check it in, check it, yeah. It's been a while, yeah. It's so much fun, so much pain. It's from my heart, yeah. I said this song is about my family, eh. Said this song is about my pain. Some quick context on that. My mother, yeah, she ain't awesome. And she never has been, but she's also dying. So you're like, how do I love you? But also you say the worst shit, like still to this day. Like to your grave, you're gonna take it there. And so that song, when I was producing it, I brought in a bunch of trumpet players that you can hear on the track. There's a lot of guitar players that I brought in. And we were in the room. It's all trans folks on that song. All the musicians on that song are trans folks. Like everybody, the guitarist, the bassist, everything. It's all trans folks. And when we were in the room, we were just talking about our collective shit that we've been through with parents. And the funny thing that happened is the girl who plays trumpet, like she just started playing those parts. And then we started finessing them and we added more parts. And then it just like, I just kind of started, I was crying and like, I just was wailing. And that's where all the background, yeah, and all that shit comes from. Like we were just there. And then there's like, we need to illustrate the chaotic moment from the switch of, I love you, but also this shit is hard. So then you hear it go from really subdued to all these screaming horns in the background and all this stuff happening because it's supposed to illustrate the chaotic nature of her throwing dishes, throwing pans, we arguing. It's all ridiculous. And then it subdues back down into the chorus because you're trying to understand the complication of the relationship. So that's the story behind the way the song was produced. Yeah.
Y'all can hear me, right? That's what we have for today. It's really, really important. Please do not let this conversation stop here. Like what we learned today, like the lessons, like the things that we need to start ingraining and talking to ourselves in our communities and like acknowledging about ourselves. I think the biggest thing for me was like divesting power and being intentional in that. Like we need to continue these conversations. But that's all we have for the panel. Please buy this merch. Buy it. Support it. You know what I'm saying? Listen to the songs. Do the whole nine. Thank y'all so much for coming. We really do appreciate you for showing up and being in this physical space.
I'm going to be slinging some of my art prints over here, so if you want any, let me know.
That's amazing.
I don't have merch, but if you want to donate to the cause of my life, then find me.